Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing and Communications Manager at DCL, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. DCL spans across all industries. Well, without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Joanne Hackos and Stan Doherty.
Thank you, Adam. This is Joanne, and as I think many of you know, I am co-chair with Stan of the DITA Technical Communication Subcommittee and chair of the DITA Adoption Technical Committee, as well as being president of Comtech Services. But I'm here talking about strengths and weaknesses with Stan Doherty. Stan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, glad to be here. I've been working on OASIS with Joanne and the rest of the folks in the Technical Committee and the Adoption Committee, and I'm also a Technical Publications Manager on the East Coast for SimpliVity.
And I think we both have a lot of experience working with the DITA standard, but we're open today to really address your issues as prospective DITA adopters or current DITA adopters, to really, grapple with the things that are strengths and the things that are really maybe weaknesses. So we're very open to keeping this discussion really focused on what you want to know. So be prepared to put questions in the question box in your control panel, and we will be getting to those as we, perhaps during some of the presentation, if they're critical questions, or when we get to the end of the formal part of this. I think that I want to mention too that representing Comtech, as many of you know, we have a global team that works on content management solutions, and we also work with groups on customer studies and, the whole picture of what is important about information development. And you can see we've worked with lots and lots of different organizations over the years. Okay, so who has opinions about DITA? Well, I think there are lots of opinions, lots of opinions. Of course, the OASIS DITA committee members who are creating a specification and have just completed in December the DITA 1.3 specification are strong supporters, but are also quite realistic about what DITA is good for and maybe what it's not. We have the XML tool vendors, the people who are creating the authoring environment, the people who are creating content management systems, the people who are creating translation systems, all of those being put into place to support the DITA standard. It's been quite amazing for us to see in the 10 years that that DITA has been gaining market share for the vendors, how many developers, software developers, have stepped up to supporting DITA. It's really been quite amazing that of their level of enthusiasm. We have people who specialize in DITA consulting and DITA conversion, like DCL, for example, like me as a DITA consultant. And we have experienced information architects in lots of companies worldwide, experienced technical writers, translators and trainers, people who are evaluators and testers of information, who have learned about and are enthusiastic about what DITA is doing, or maybe not enthusiastic. We certainly have a string of competitors, organizations that are developing their own products, and at least one other standard, like the DocBook standard. And perhaps you might count in that S1000D, which is, of course, specific to the aviation industries. We have new users, we have former users, we have critics of DITA. All of these folks have lots and lots of opinions. So what we want to ask you, first of all, is to take a short poll. I think, Adam, you're going to put the poll up. And we're going to ask you where you are now. Who do you represent in this discussion? So here comes the poll. Where are you now? Are you using DITA today? Are you not using it and don't intend to? Are you planning to use DITA in the future? Are you on your way to do that? Have you been using DITA and now you've moved to something else? So go ahead and answer the poll. We'll give you a minute to do that.
So Joanne, with just under 90% of the attendees voting, 45% have said that they are using DITA, 35% are saying they're planning to use DITA, 19% said they're not using DITA, and 2% saying we're using DITA and have moved to something else.
Okay, so we've got a largely supportive group here. So that's going to be interesting, Stan, to see what we learn.
Absolutely.
We had a question from Karen Lowe. She said, I'd like to add both using and not using. And that's true, too, of course. We have lots of organizations where some groups have started using DITA and other groups are not yet or don't intend to, especially in the large companies. Ken says, using DITA and wish you weren't. Okay. So we have a couple of other points of view represented there, and that'll be interesting to find out what folks mean by that. Okay, let's see if I can get slides going again. Stan and I have been collecting some of these things, and I know Stan is going to chime in on a few of these as well. We had a madcap flare consultant, somebody who supports the product, madcap flare. And he says, here's my card. When you get into DITA for 6 months and conclude that you need to get out, call me. Stan, you've got somebody from your company, Deborah.
Yeah. Deborah says, DITA is so amazingly flexible, it's hard to know where to start using it.
Okay, so she's on the positive side. Tom Johnson has been, a pretty well-reasoned critic. It points to Markdown as much simpler and more enjoyable to work in. You simply set off code with ticks. If you're working in text formats, text file formats, Markdown is a joy to use. Shouldn't writers who spend so much time developing content enjoy the format and syntax they're writing in? Tom, that's an interesting opinion about the simplicity, and it's something I think we will take up. Stan, you've got a couple of others you can point to.
Yeah, Rebecca Anderson, coming in from academia, has done some formal studies on CCMS deployments and adoption, and commented trial participants in one of her studies were well aware of the history or resistance to new tools. Every 4 years we move to a new tool, whoopee ding, and thus saw usability as a key factor in persuading members of a writing team of the benefits of adopting a particular CMS or a particular XML editor. If a system were simply too complex or hard to use, this would dissuade members from adopting it and completing their day-to-day tasks, which is our job.
Yeah, and I think Rebecca traced the work of the attempt at implementation of DITA in one organization, and also I think came to the conclusion that the whole thing could have been handled a lot better. So that way I think we'll speak to some of that as well. Alyssa Alley in her blog said DITA is reliable if the structure is reliable. Team has to be strong and have a foolproof structure for their content. And, I would certainly support that. It's important, I think, for people to organize the DITA standard and focus on the parts that they need. I think what happens in a lot of organizations is it's simply dumped on them with not a lot of good decisions on what's necessary and what's not. And I think Alyssa's comment sort of illustrates that.
Yeah, agreed. The next one, for example, touches on the same point. What if DITA is overly optimized for one market versus others? Is it really a niche? So one person writing a comment in Tom Johnson's blog said, I believe at best DITA fulfills a very specific niche in the technical communications. And it isn't that one ring, one solution fits all that many in the field have been claiming. And that word claiming is important. Depending who's making the claims, you get a lot of different feedback.
Yeah, I think that I think most of us who've been working on the development of DITA wouldn't have made that claim, that it fits everything. We do, however, find that it fits a number of interesting things that are not technical communication. So I would argue that it's not restricted, and not in our experience, not at all restricted to technical communications. So we'll see how this comes out. We've got a few more that I think are interesting. Also responding to Tom Johnson, Natalie says, DITA is not for the semi-lone writer. It's a great answer for large documentation groups who must share and reuse documentation, publish the same content in multiple formats, and localize in many languages. And that's something we hear a great deal, that people assume that it's for only for large departments. I guess that I do want to mention that we know plenty of instances where it's being used by individual writers or very, very small groups and used successfully. So I think people have to be careful that that what they're saying represents more than their own point of view, perhaps. That somebody saying it's not for the semi-lone writer perhaps doesn't know about the groups that are using it that are lone writers.
The next quote touches on doing a business analysis, understanding what your requirements and needs are. Yapa, one of the bloggers, says the risk of DITA is fine when there is a real need for reuse, when the translation savings can't be garnered by some simpler alternative like DocBook XML or Madcap Flare, and when you absolutely need to enforce strict information typing on writers. The problem is that nearly all outfits that are adopting DITA do not have these real justifications. So again, kind of there's another axis, another way to look at it. Where's your need for deployment relative to your business need?
Yeah, and I think people have to be able to make a fair and explicit business case, and there are lots of reasons. Translation isn't the only one, nor is reuse. I think I look at some of these situations I see where the information in an organization is so inconsistent that it makes sense to have consistency. And do you need DITA to enforce consistency? No, not necessarily. Does it help? Sure. So there's a lot of really important ways to look at what a business case might be. And there are organizations for whom the business case is just not there.
Agreed.
And you got the last one here.
Alrighty, I love this last one. Delivering the right content in the right format to the right people at the right time, kind of the DITA mantra, right? Means that if you write a letter to your grandmother and it includes a bullet list, you're doing it wrong.
I think that's probably true.
What can you say? It's all audience and just anticipating, why we're doing this, anticipate your audience and their needs, real basic.
Okay, let's see. I think that there really are challenges. These are the kinds of questions that I think those quotes really seem to reflect. How can DITA be simultaneously too restrictive and too flexible? And we were hearing both of those points of view in those quotations. How can it be a standard if everyone implements it so differently, which is a really interesting view of what a standard represents. And how do we manage expectations, especially if we're trying to consider DITA as an alternative for our teams? How do we make sure that it isn't seen as a cure-all, for all that ails you? Remember, let me start out with a couple of ideas that might be helpful about what is DITA anyway. And I'm sure all of you have seen this kind of an analysis. What is it? It stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. Well, why did we access Darwin? Why did we use Darwin as our starting point? And that because one of the underlying frameworks of DITA is the idea of specialization. And that's something I think that in part should be thought of as addressing people who say, well, it's only for TechCom, because TechCom is really only one of the possible specializations. We're certainly seeing a lot of groups now in learning and training world adopting DITA for training content, and it seems to work really well. And that learning and training is a specialization of DITA. We're also seeing that groups can take the DITA standard, the base, and specialize it to meet the needs of some unusual organization. So when the architecture was developed originally, this concept of specialization was included, and part of it was a sort of a reaction to the direction that the DocBook standard had taken. Remember that DocBook and DITA both come from OASIS, and they're both XML standards. DocBook without specialization means that people take the DocBook core and they customize it to their own needs. But once it's customized, it's yours. You're maintaining that. It is now a completely different solution. In the DITA architecture, we introduced specialization, which allows you to make the same kinds of changes you would make in a DocBook customization, but you still have the underlying DITA structure that can be updated with new versions and supported by new toolkits. That's still there, and specialization doesn't remove your connection to the core framework. A second part of DITA, the IT in DITA, is that it's based upon information typing. And the information typing comes from a lot of places. Some of them you all know as information mapping, and the work done in information mapping to help people who were not technical writers organize their information so that it was readable and understandable. Well, information typing became an important basis in which we talk about DITA. And concept, task, and reference were the original base information types, and now we've got more, especially for technical communication, where we added troubleshooting and glossary. And then we have learning and training information types, which are a bit different. And we have, other opportunities where organizations are introducing their own information types to help standardize the content, to help give it form and structure. And if you go back to information mapping as your core principle, what the people in information mapping learned was giving people structure enabled them, engineers in aerospace, for example, or in development, enabled them to create communications, instructional material that was a lot more understandable to the people to whom it was directed. And finally, architecture. That basis for DITA provides a framework for information modeling throughout an enterprise. A lot of choices and a lot of capabilities. So that was sort of the original emphasis that we put on developing this. Could we make it something that was flexible and could be used in a lot of situations effectively? Just to give you a little bit of background, in 2002, we formed a committee starting with IBM, who had been developing the DITA standard as an IBM-specific construct. In 2004, the official agreement came from IBM to release what they had done at that point to OASIS, to the standards community. And in 2005, our team of information developers, primarily information developers and a few tools developers, issued the DITA 1.0 specification. 5 years later, it takes a while to do things in a standards world. DITA 1.2 was released, where we added things like key refs to help people simplify their use of their reuse models. We introduced learning and training specialization and a number of other improvements. And then just in December of last year, 2015, the DITA 1.3 specification was released. Our next goal in the committee is to work toward two things. One is the lightweight DITA specification, and the second is DITA 2.0. So it's a well-developed standard supported by lots of volunteers and with lots of organizations behind it. So what is DITA exactly? Again, let me come back to that. It's an architecture for creating topic-oriented information-typed content that you can reuse or single source in a whole variety of ways. It's also an architecture you can use for creating new types that fit your information and describing new information domains, the specifics, the details, based upon existing types and domains. And here's that notion of basis and being able to specialize off the base. Those are the things that we would point to as far as what the DITA architecture is trying to do. Also, it's something that we think is extremely important for everyone here to realize, and everyone who's even looking at beginning with DITA, and that is that DITA is not a tool. And I think that misconception is rampant, that you're buying something. And, I think it's also because in technical communication, we really haven't had a lot of standards. DocBook has been there, and we have lots of organizations that adopted DocBook for documentation purposes a long time ago. I started working with DocBook almost 25 years ago now. But the use of standards was not pervasive in our industry, and certainly not in the software and hardware worlds that many of you work. So there was no history of using the standard, what that meant. So the assumption was we're going to buy another tool. And of course you need tools, so you can kind of get away with almost nothing if you want to take on, typing just a form basis and coding everything yourself like a programmer might. But it's just not a tool, and we had technical communication organizations really not knowing what to do with that. Aren't we buying something else?
Yeah, the number of times, Joanne, where you're going to fill out a PO to go buy something to enable or to deploy part of this, and there's real no checkbox here other than, this is a standard, and there's all these other tools are supporting it. Even from a finance point of view, it's a little difficult to kind of quantify.
Right. Yeah. What slot do you put that in?
Yeah.
I remember, excuse me, early on, compact computer. Somebody in finance wanting to save money suggested that the writers all work in Notepad to use DITA. The writers were not enthusiastic about that. I think they finally bought an editing tool. But that was early on. That was 2005 or so. But, Notepad was free. And of course we know too that you can author things in lots of free environments today anyway. So what have we learned? Keith Shingeli Roberts has done a wonderful job of tracking adopters of DITA by industry. And this is the report, the 2012 report. See his DITAwriter.com for updates to this. But you can see that, software development is a big chunk, and, that's sort of where things started, although IBM certainly represented both hardware and software in their original design of this. We've got a slice of education and training. We've got a slice of healthcare. Almost every industry that we can think about is doing something interesting. And notice that there is also, however, this huge chunk of other, almost equal to the 30% in software. And if you look at Keith's list of other, you're going to find HR departments and people in education and all sorts of things that you might not expect. But it's, usage by segment and industry is really pretty powerful and interesting, and growing.
It suggests, furthermore, that there are ways to customize and to build paths through DITA to support almost any one of these markets, any one of these information architecture needs. A lot of it's just a matter of identifying and then telling other people that you did it, sharing.
Yeah, and sharing that information. What kind of a solution works really effectively? We worked with an HR department that was creating employee handbooks, and they had 4 versions in multiple countries, multiple languages, and they doing that work by hand took on the order of 6 months to do an update. They were able to move that content into DITA. It wasn't very extensive content, but they went from months to do an update to minutes. So, it just depends on taking something that is basically it's very, very simple structure, not information typed at all, and really making that usable and easy for people to use. Okay, and in our committee, in our adoption committee and the technical communications subcommittee that Stan and I work with, we've been spending the last 6 months or so thinking about DITA strengths and weaknesses, challenges and opportunities, a good SWOT analysis. And here are a couple of things that we think are strengths. One is that there's a really solid backing in research for the ideas about information design incorporated into DITA. The topic-based approach, which we've expanded now in DITA 1.3, and DITA 1.2 and 1.3, helps organizations agree on structures for their content. It supports the single sourcing and content reviews I know that many of you know about and may be choosing DITA because of that. It supports semantic markup of content, identifying that this piece of content is a step in a procedure or the prerequisite needed to perform a procedure, or it's a hazard statement, and that hazard statement takes a particular structure if it's done according to regulations, for example. It's supported by increasingly sophisticated tools. I'm really impressed by the support of the developer community to create tools that will work well. Even developers who've had non-DITA tools before have seen this as an opportunity. There's a really strong community of information developers open to anyone who really wants to get involved. And it's also, I think, supported by a community of experts, many of whom are volunteers working to improve the standard and to help people adopt it effectively. So Stan, you want to talk about some of these other benefits that we've been seeing, and then we'll talk about the problems.
Absolutely. So as John said, there's a lot of design intelligence and a lot of effort put into the strengths and kind of the design point of DITA, and flowing out of that are all these benefits. And it's important to note that all these benefits, and we'll see in the next few slides, for business and internationalization and collaboration, they're all achievable, they're all possible, but it's important to note they're not automatic, right? You kind of have to work at it, and you have to work with people to figure it out. But given that most people on the call have some familiarity with DITA, I'll just kind of go through the high points. DITA offers the opportunities for standardization, for consistency, both at the source and at the production, the generation level. Reuse is just, there's just no way around it. It's just a huge thing. And the ability to chunk the information in such a way that it can be reused in a very facile way is important. Increasingly with a web presence, being able to take the output from your DITA sources and to make it match or meld in with your overall corporate branding is important. And that's thoroughly possible, very doable. And there's a good part of this that just kind of allows you to customize things without getting locked in, right? You can customize, at the source level with all the topic types and keys and keywords, but you can also customize it if you're in fact working with many partners, as many companies do. It's very powerful in all those areas. I think, click, there we go. So for localization, I think you've got translation memory as just a tremendous return on investment. If you've invested in the semantic markup, if you invested in the structure, what you're going to see is that when that investment hits a translation shop, and especially as it hits translation memory, is just going to amplify the savings and just amplify the control and the manageability of the information. And that's what at the end of the day it's all about. And also the fact that you've got modular information here also means that you're able to do incremental handoffs in the middle of a release to a translation agency, so you're not kind of putting everything at the end as a waterfall or as a back end, big blob. So it just provides all sorts of return on investment for manageability and also for just adding value across a global market. And better believe, we've designed into DITA, tried to design out of it, in fact, many of the cultural biases that kind of creep in. So we've tried to make it flexible on little things like how do you sort tables, how do you sort output, right? You just need to think through that. You need to think if you're working with a global economy and global markets that you're going to have to build that in. It's just part of what we've tried to put in there, and then you can take care. You can actually benefit from it. Okay, I think that was next slide. I'm not able to move it forward, Joanne.
Yeah, there you go. I think that as you said, we've seen a lot of benefits for the localization process. Just because you can, once you've localized a lot of content, it's really easy to just indicate to your translation vendors what is new or what has been changed. It doesn't mean that you don't send them the whole thing, but that the parts that are marked to be translated are so easy to set up and to work really effectively. What we're really trying to do is build consistency in all languages, make sure it's used properly. We're very aware, by the way, that there are some complications with localization and reuse. And we're hoping that people read the articles that were done by the translation subcommittee about how to properly use reuse, at what level to use it, because we know that it can because of inflection, languages that use masculine and feminine forms or more than, multiple forms, can wreak havoc if you've substituted text in the middle of a sentence or for something else. So we're aware that there are benefits and then there are problems with localization that people need to deal with effectively. But when you look at the cost savings, we had a presentation at one of the CMS conferences at the Content Management Strategies Conference a few years ago from Christina Brink of Xylem, a manufacturer of worldwide global manufacturer of pumps for the water industry. And she reported that in their first few years of implementation, and they're probably in their 6th year now, 7th year, they were able to save over $9 million in translation costs. So it was pretty significant. And they've addressed the weaknesses, but they're seeing an enormous cost improvement. They earned back their entire initial implementation cost within the first year.
Wow.
Doing that. Okay, Stan, and a couple of things about production.
Yeah, I think in addition to the source management, the localization management, the fact that you've got a robust processing environment, meaning converting these maps and these topics into all sorts of different multi-channel outputs, HTML, PDF, EPUB, wikis, things like that, and dynamic rendering, to have the sources increasingly on a web server, and then as customers interact with it, especially in some customized way, they'll be able to see rendered and customized versions of that content on the fly. So a lot of the logic of this was built in a long time ago, and we're all beneficiaries of it. So again, the topics and the maps, that collaboration, and then all of the transforms that have been developed by all sorts of people in the community. Make no mistake, a lot of this is community driven, and there's lots of opportunities to add and improve the styles that are with the default kind of processors that you'll have out there. So tremendous benefit for production. I think.
Now, I did, however, get a comment just the other day from someone who said, well, our writers like to format. They like to, to make sure that the page breaks all come in exactly the place that they think they should, or, that everything on a page looks perfect, and that they don't want an automatic production. They don't want automatic formatting.
Yeah, my background, by the way, is in typography from the Elizabethan era, which had ultimate control over hot lead type and everything. So my background is
kerning, Stan. Don't forget that.
Yes. So my background is crying out to say, yes, I want absolute total control over everything on the galley. But at the same time, I think there's a big business dimension to this, which is if you want to be doing high production, low touch, you don't have to review everything before it goes out after your final builds, then you're going to be optimizing a lot of your processing and frankly a lot of your processes to be able to do this stuff automatically, to be able to do it again a low touch. And so there's definitely a trade-off there. I mean, if in fact you're working closely with a marketing department that's doing a lot of layout-intensive stuff in InDesign or something, or Illustrator, yeah, you need that control, no question. But if you're doing a 5,000-page API manual, you really cannot go back every build that you need to ship and be looking at where the hard page breaks landed. Right, yeah. Especially if you've got conditionalized content. So it's trade-offs throughout. So my heart is with I want to control every page break and every table table break. But at the same time, the business side of it says although there is value there, there may be higher priorities.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that we don't know where somebody's going to look at this content, and I've seen people put hard page breaks, and then somebody's reading it on a different device or in a different browser, and suddenly you have page breaks randomly in the middle of pages because they've been hard-coded. So you have to think about the fact that the way people are getting this information has changed drastically.
So we lose control on the back end to some degree.
Yeah. Okay, how about their collaborations?
Wow, this is an interesting new development. The world is moving away from having XML-only towers, right? Where we can live in our little village doing XML and DITA, and we have organizations that are now designed from a business point of view for collaboration, and so we're adapting and we're moving in that direction as well. In the past, even for DITA 1.3, right now you author an XML or you don't author and get stuff through the DITA pipeline at all. With lightweight DITA and some other kind of interesting dynamic environments, you will be able to author in source formats that are not XML DITA, things like Markdown or XHTML5 or even something in Microsoft Word or OpenOffice, and to have that transparently integrated, at least at the topic level, with maps. And so when you think about it, for every one DITA, aware writer there is out there, there are probably 200 other people who are potential content contributors. And if we can find ways to, get that content that they're authoring into our environment, and especially into our pipeline, there's tremendous values for companies, tremendous value, tremendous benefits.
And we're also seeing a lot of the tools vendors stepping up to making the authoring extremely transparent. Many of them supporting something that is a word environment or a word-like environment, or what they call predictive authoring, where it's sort of the system can guess what you're trying to do as you enter something. And we have an article on the CIDM website, a review article of the easy DITA authoring solutions that people might be interested in looking at as well.
So we're trying to break down the silos and open it up, honestly, and we would love to get your help and get your support. Let's see, we go to that previous slide, do you think? Try.
There you go.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
So as Joanne's been mentioning, the benefits of talking to people are you get to hear what they got to say, and we're trying to calculate, when somebody has either a positive or a negative opinion of DITA's strengths or weaknesses, where is that coming from? And we see central to that kind of variance of opinion the notion of setting realistic expectations. So as you see in the left column, and I mean, if you see DITA fundamentally as a tool, just whatever tool that you buy off the internet, and you expect it to be a general purpose kind of shrink wrap piece of software, then you're going to get upset when it doesn't behave that well. And it doesn't behave as you would expect, Microsoft Word or FrameMaker or something. And so if in a dialogue with your own team or with management or something, you can condition their expectations that this is not a tool, it's a standard, then you're going to do much better in terms of setting expectations, for return on investment and other things. And as well, if you think it's a kind of a do-it-all suite, beginning to end, which tend to be proprietary, they tend to be integrated. Some of the examples there are kind of Flare and AuthorIt and some of the European CCMSs, the DIRCOM stuff. They're kind of put together based on good practices. There's some awfully good software in there, but again, it's proprietary, and you are captive to some degree from day one. But if you look at DITA as a suite, and that every single piece is glued together towards a certain number of tasks, you're going to get frustrated. It's not going to behave that well. It really is designed in that third row for to being a standards-driven framework, and we'll see more slides on this in a bit. The fourth one, I think, we'll also have a slide on, which is, if you see DITA as a cure for weak content, anemic content, you're going to be especially frustrated because DITA, yes, it has topic types and information typing and a lot of semantic markup, but the effectiveness of that is all precluded on having decent and well-organized content to begin with. So again, it's a lot of it's expectation setting. Do the next slide, Joanne. Thanks. So looking at that framework notion, again, this is the design point of DITA. A framework consists of components, and those components, how you use them and their quality and with their capabilities are all somewhat variant, right? So if you're able to look at DITA as a framework, you need to understand that there's going to be lots of decisions you need to make about selecting things and integrating them and to some degree putting them together into workflows, right? Next slide. There we go. So in any implementation of DITA, I mean, on the left-hand side of the slide, you see that's your framework. These are all your components, but you need to make technology decisions, you know, which editors, which frameworks, and you make, as more importantly, a lot of design and information architecture decisions. How are you going to reuse? At what level are you going to reuse? What's your linking strategy? How are you going to reference? So a framework really is, as the structuralists would say, it's kind of a superset or a long of all possibilities that you could implement for any one market or any one situation. But it's up to you and with the advice of lots of folks who could help you to come up with the specifics of that implementation, the parole, the specifics, the instantiations of it. Next slide. And that's if you're doing one implementation. If you're in a company or you're in an environment where you have to use this content across multiple kinds of markets or implementations, you've now made the problem or the challenge that much more complex. So it's largely a matter of understanding kind of what you're getting into and building up your sense of where do you get accurate and good information to make decisions. Probably one of the biggest ones, if you could, the next slide. The biggest ones involve very, very often content. We've been talking mostly about the kind of the technology and the designs and all of that. When I've done really, really awful DITA migrations of particular documents, it sometimes was me, but more often than not, there was something really odd about the content. So one of the things you really have to take a look at before you get serious about doing a broad implementation, I love doing pilots, but to do a broad implementation, you really need to look at your content. Take a look at the technical quality, look at the completeness, and then as well, take a look at the information architecture of what's there before you start to put it into any sort of DITA markup. I've in fact found that if I was trying to migrate or in the context of a pilot to do a port or to do a re-implementation of a guide, let's say 50, 100 pages, that was poorly organized, it didn't have a lot of flow, and there were lots of logic issues, moving it into DITA, in other words, kind of forcing it into some of those structures and forcing it into those semantic elements actually made the situation worse because it kind of expose those underlying problems in logic, like the old metaphor of draining the swamp. I mean, when you start to really work on all sorts of strange stuff now comes to the surface that had partially been masked before with an architecture that didn't necessarily promote semantic markup or a lot of this kind of logical progression. So really, really take a look at your content. And if you have suspicions that the content needs to get reworked extensively before you move into DITA, please have those conversations. DITA is not, it's not a panacea. It is not a corrective for challenged content by any means. And do pilots. Again, I highly recommend just take 20 pages here, 40 pages over there, 30 topics of something, and just do a test. And when you say, well, my goodness, geez, why did this one take so much less time to move over into DITA than the other one? I'll bet you that it's largely involving the content of the quality of content, sorry. So next slide. So I think.
Sorry, just a minute. There you go.
Oh, there we go. So did you want to take some of this, Joanne, or you want me to keep going?
Go ahead, and I'll chime in.
All right. Fair enough. So the kind of exhortation here is that if you approach your look at DITA, your investigation of DITA, or your maintenance of DITA and extension of it, and you're aware of where is all this wonderful available support for it. Again, it's a standard, it's a community-supported standard. and you know some of the soft spots, we'll see in a sec, then you're going to be in a position, hopefully, be talking to the right people, having the right conversations, and testing what you'd like to do. I'll use a quick analogy. I promise to be fast. In New England, where I live here, in the February and March timeframe, we get these beautiful catalogs, right, of flowers and trees, and everything is so gray and horrible here in the winter, right? They're just going to go out and buy everything because it's so beautiful, right? But you know, if you go in New England at least, and you plant all of this stuff, regardless of planting zones and water and sunlight and everything else, almost all of it's going to die, right? So
Right.
it's simply a matter
Happens in the Rockies too.
I mean, whatever someone is telling you that, you know, DITA can do anything, it will grow anywhere, it will flourish anywhere, please, you know, be cautious. You know, do your homework, and we really do look at some of the soft spots. I mean, for example, we have a beautiful DITA 1.3 spec that's largely authored for XML experts, for tool developers, and not for non-experts. We have wonderful DITA adoption white papers, but I'd say we need 5 or 6 times as many of them. So that's by the way, that's a not too subtle pitch for, you know, getting involved if you can. And we don't really have a compliance suite. We have conformance statements, but not a compliance suite per se. So sometimes a little difficult to test out whether a particular tool or an interface between two tools is really compliant. And we're always looking for robust sample implementations, and especially skins, design, presentation, things that make this stuff looks really nice. You know, I want to see beautiful stuff on the output, and I'm particularly challenged in that area. I want other people to jump in and do beautiful stuff that I appear to have not talent for doing. So kind of look at your available supports. That's one of the benefits of being in a standard, but also understand where there are soft spots. And kind of the argument is that if you kind of look at these, and you look at your own business needs, you look at your own requirements and your general content strategy across your company, I think you're going to approach all of this from the point of view of being informed,
Yeah.
and it works.
I think in fact, we had a question from someone about, you know, where do I read about this? And, you know, if you're a potential user and not a vendor or IT expert, don't read the spec. It's not designed for that purpose at all. There are a number of good books out. You know, what I've said to people is attend a webinar, go to a conference, read a book, take a course, find people to talk to, you know, like the user groups or other people in your community that might be doing this, and, you know, find out good ways to get educated. But what you know, I don't recommend people doing is trying to read the spec if they're not really technical, or just downloading a DTD and seeing what happens. Because I think you just get really confused.
Yeah. That's one of the big expectations. If you expect it to be that easy, it's going to take a little bit of work. There are people to help, though. That's that next slide, kind of the, you know, geez, you know, talk to people. When you're in the middle of one of these things and you're debating what to do, someone who is a skeptic of DITA or has been in and out of it is your best friend, really. You know, talk to people about their experiences, what went well and what didn't. That notion of a collective, you know, kind of collective experience or collective best practices is in this case not baloney. It's really quite powerful.
And we had a couple of resources that we did mention, and you know, some links. Downloading the DITA Toolkit, which is the production side of things. Talking to others, like the DITA Yahoo user group, where we have people asking questions and technical experts answering them. And then research more about it. You know, come to OASIS, look at the cover pages, DITA on OASIS, come to the publications of the adoption committee. As Stan said, we need more of them, but you know, the ones we have are going to be helpful. Go to dita.xml.org. You can search on white papers and get a really nice collection. Comtech DITA website has a lot of resources as well that people can look at. And we also invite you to get in touch with us if you have specific questions, including Mark Gross of DCL Lab about things like conversions. So there's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah,
and we can also, I think, mention that the CIDM, the Center for Information Development Management, which is an organization that supports managers and communications experts worldwide, has a important conference, Content Management Strategies DITA North America, coming in April, another way to learn from a lot of people. I know we had a number of comments coming in about, can we see examples of people who have done really good things? And, one of the things you might do is look at the list of speakers and their companies that are in the program, and then go to those company websites and take a look at some of the documentation that's been created. I might point to Cisco Systems, for example, which has been using DITA for a number of years for almost everything. So almost anything you can see on their open website will have been created in DITA. And Stan, I think you have a couple of examples that you could quote too of websites that people could look at.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be the solo kind of isolated content developers in the larger corporate pool. We need to be collaborating with all the other content developers. We need to be working with support, using their portals. Like my company, SimpliVity, we're looking not to create our own documentation portal, but to work with the support people to go through their portal. So you get a unified experience, the customer experience of searching things, finding exactly what you want, and kind of reducing those barriers traditionally between what support had done, training had done, and tech pubs might have done. It's real just heads-up planning and collaboration.
So we've got a number of questions and comments, and let's see. Let me see if I can bring some of these up. Couple of early ones. Is there an advantage to using DITA if you have little or no reuse of content? What do you think, Sam?
I think reuse is one axis. If you're, for example, if you don't have a lot of reuse, but you have a lot of translation, or you have a lot of collaboration needs, or you really need to publish into different kind of channels, web, PDF, online help, then you've got like maybe 3 out of 4 of kind of the big motivations, right? Any one of these, if you don't have it, or if it's not obvious that you have it, you can just take a look at these other things and see if you would get a return on investment from pursuing it there. On reuse in particular, though, it's a little tricky. If you're not currently working in an environment that supports robust reuse, it's often the case that people may not realize that they actually do have a lot of potential for it. And that's one of the benefits of being able to do a little bit of piloting work.
Yeah, well, that was interesting. That was true of our HR team. That they had, basically very little idea that those documents that they were putting out for various groups within a very big company were, should have been exactly the same. And I think one of the problems that they had was that they weren't the same. There were subtle differences, which happened because things got updated at different times by different people, the same stuff updated slightly differently. And when you have something that is your employee handbook, which is a legal document, you don't want it to be that full of errors, that come from just the updating process. So you begin to see, gee, we could have done this as one document with variations and publish it in a number of different ways. So, that was a surprise to them that there was reuse potential in what they were doing.
Yeah, usually a pilot or just testing it out, you'll see it very quickly.
Yeah. David Lance has a number of comments that about XML and about topics, and I think one thing we should mention is that the DITA topic is part of that is it's the authoring environment. So I can say, well, I'm just going to author this. I'm going to write a task. I'm going to write a step-by-step procedure for doing something. And I can do that as an independent chunk. Uh-oh, the bird clock is going off. Sorry about that, guys. It'll stop in a second. But it doesn't, I can author a separate procedure. And I can author a table, a lookup table with a lot of data in it as another separate topic. But then I can publish them together. I can publish them together in a PDF output. I can print from the PDF. I can publish them in an HTML output as a continuous string of flowing topics without pagination. I can display them as individual topics that people can say, oh, there's my answer to my question. Let me just print that one off or save it to a file. So just because I'm authoring in topics doesn't mean I'm publishing in topics. And I've
that's great. That's a great point. I mean, if a topic is not a blob, because in DITA there's a hierarchy, and the semantic markup tends to allow you to pick and reuse bits and pieces of it. You can take a large API manual, let's say, which initially feels like a little parade of these blob topics, right? But in fact, then you can create multiple quick reference, deliverables simply by reaching down inside these individual topics and the markup that's there, and building a second or a third or a fourth tier of deliverables. So they seem to be, you might look at them as being self-contained, but and you can move them around as though they were, but they're not opaque. They're not blobs. You can reach inside and reuse stuff very, very easily.
Well, I was, we had a project some time ago where, in an API project, where we wanted to create a permuted index. Some of you may not know what that is, but a permuted index takes the words in a phrase and indexes each word in alphabetical order. So the first word is indexed in alphabetical order, the second word is in that index, the third word, and so on. And the reason for that is the company wanted to take not the name of the command, but the description of what the command was used for, which is, of course, what somebody's looking up. I want to do this. What's the command I need? Well, in a command dictionary, like any dictionary, you have to know the word before you can look it up, rather than the definition. So what we wanted was an index of the definitions. And we were able to take an API structure and address that short description or definition, of what is the purpose of this command, and pull it out and create a permuted index that was enormously helpful for people who were unfamiliar with the commands and needed to find something that would do what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So XML structure and XML markup gives you a database of individual items that you can, like Stan says, you can address in new ways that you may not have thought of in the past. It's to me, it's very exciting.
Yeah, and in collaboration with like UX groups that are designing things and audiences and marketing people with taxonomies, if you've got rich data in your content, you can work with them to personalize it and to customize it so that, we bring our information closer and closer to the actual needs and preferences of individual users. And I find that just really good. And I've not been able to do that before, so I'm kind of excited about this.
We've got a really interesting comment from Richard. He says part of the issue is the need for a content management system and other specialized tools. This can raise the cost per writer to $10,000 a head in a small group. It's really difficult to justify that cost. My response would be it doesn't need to be that expensive. The cost of an editor, you can always do free Notepad, but I don't recommend that. But the cost of the editors is usually about the same or considerably lower than you might have paid for FrameMaker, for example. And that, you know, today, of course, FrameMaker completely supports DITA. So if you already have FrameMaker, you've already got a DITA editor. But, you know, editors are in the matter of, you know, hundreds of dollars per person. And that's our pretty much used to buying tools in that neighborhood for publications groups in general. So there you have an editor. You can also, you know, with all of those editors, also use things you have in place, like a SharePoint site within your company, or you can use a free content management utility, like an SVN, for example, where you can store and do version control of your content, and at no cost at all except the setup cost. These are things that are free. We also see content management systems, which are helpful. Remember that IBM went without a content management system for 12 years, maybe, doing things through version control, basic version control, the same version control that your programmers might be using. So I just don't think that it has to be that expensive.
Yeah, I agree. It's a nice, initially when you're starting off, you can leverage all of those open source and all those commodity tools. And the good news is that when you get closer and closer to needing the workflows and a lot of the translation memory management stuff and a lot of the things that come with a content management system, you're probably in the position where you've invested enough in DITA, so you're going to be able to more easily calculate that return on investment of moving to a CCMS. And
Right.
if you get there and you got the data, and that's a nice part, just build your data, right? And if it isn't justified, you don't do it, right? But another thing Joanne mentioned also, just commodity. I mean, as much as possible, DITA as a standard means that it's approaching being a commodity technology. You should be able to look at multiple vendors who all support DITA and then choose whichever tool matches your needs and your price range. So it's not $1 million or nothing. There are some very, very robust and inexpensive content management systems. And a lot of it's just getting your data.
The free SVN, I know if you purchase the Oxygen XML editor, it comes with SVN.
It comes with an SVN plugin. You
Right.
still need to do the back-end server. But yeah, these are integrated. Yep.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's clear you don't need a CMS. And then somebody said, Notepad isn't that bad.
Hardcore.
Well, that's really hardcore, yes. And yes, DITA was invented at IBM. Now, it's gone way past that. But that's where it started. And it was because IBM needed to update what they were doing with their content. They had an older system that was based on DocBook that was aging and no longer very flexible. So they started developing a topic-based environment which allowed people to reuse content in a lot of interesting ways. And you know, that was the start. The you know, really interesting, I think, perspective. Let me see if we've got some other Ken wants to know if we know about some more weaknesses, and he said we kind of focused on the strength side. Complications and warnings about deployments, weaknesses. What do you feel is there, Stan, that we should emphasize?
Well, I think I would describe as a weakness that there's nothing necessarily in the DITA framework that makes it easy to shape how you make decisions. In other words, the best practices are there. Talking to people, you see it after somebody's explained things to you. Like, don't create links between thousands of topics as peers because it turns into spaghetti code, right? There's a great example of the road to perdition in DITA, right? But those best practices, those things that kind of nudge people along into having a very successful implementation, aren't necessarily obvious, right? In some proprietary products, they've removed the things that cause the most pain. I mean, like, I work for a software company. If something causes a lot of pain or a lot of bugs, we see if we can do without it, right? Any company does that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with a standard, you really want to create it as open as possible. So the very openness of it, to some degree, doesn't necessarily have inside it a lot of like hard and fast rules about making decisions and making judgments. So the openness is both a strength, right, and that you can eventually do most anything you want, especially if you get some help. But it's also a little bit of a weakness. Many times folks that get into DITA and then get right out, 6 or 8 months later, is they're kind of making a lot of guesses. And
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing necessarily in the spec or necessarily in the architecture that says, well, if you really, really want to do that, go ahead, but we discourage it. It's so easy to do linking, and to use that example again, to link between topics that to some degree built in there is a little bit of a lack of constraint or a little bit of lack of control. So I often describe DITA as a two-edged sword. It's really, really powerful, and at the same time, it's really, really powerful. If you want to get into trouble quickly, right, and create a monster, I can't recommend a better environment than DITA. Right. It's, if you just follow down the road to perdition, it's going to get bad. Right. So I would say that's kind of a weakness. It would be nice if we were able to guide somehow or shape the decisions or increase somehow the information immediately available for people making those calls. But when things go pear-shaped, as they say, that's kind of what I see, that there weren't a lot of constraints or guardrails necessarily about some of the decision making. It could encourage anything.
I think there is also, if you need to have somebody on your team or help from somebody who does have, a good technical background. And that is not going to be true of every writing team. I mean, you can certainly, the problems for, I use Microsoft Word for lots of things still. Just standard writing, and that can be an incredibly frustrating tool to use. Just like I remember, years and years of experience with FrameMaker, not knowing, understanding why something went wrong, and we had people on the staff who were FrameMaker gurus, and you end up, I think, needing a DITA guru on your team, or you need help from an outsider on a regular basis, because running the transforms, creating the output, can present mind-boggling errors. It's not working. Why isn't it working? If you look at the DITA Yahoo user group, you'll see questions from people who are just so frustrated. Why isn't this doing what I'm doing? And typically somebody can figure out what was done wrong. And thank goodness we have that kind of help, from the experts. We're going to have by the way, we're going to have an Ask the Expert session on April 6th in the afternoon, on Wednesday afternoon. The experts are all going to be there. I've got an assembly of experts, and people can come with their questions about the Open Toolkit or about DITA, things that are tough to figure out in doing things like running the Open Toolkit. It's not necessarily simple. When it's been all set up for you,
Right.
Like I have mine set up to generate the things that I'm creating, it pretty much works seamlessly. And I never have to think about it. But, I'm not the style sheet person, so if I want to change something, I've got to go and ask somebody to do that, somebody who has that background, and really try to do that, in a better way than I can. So it does take that kind of expertise to get things to be working. But I found that to be true of every proprietary tool that I've ever used, and there's been a lot of really different ones over the years. Many of them, we had a heck of a time trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think the bar, I agree very much. I think the bar to getting into DITA and doing pilots and testing it and getting some experience on your own, right, is pretty low these days. There are wonderful tools. You can get one of these wonderful DITA editors that has the DITA Open Toolkit or something comparable built in. So you can do authoring, you can work in the out-of-the-box kind of DITA environment, largely to experiment with it and to answer lots of questions. How's my content working? How are my skills or the skills of someone on my team commensurate to what I'm bumping into? Do I run into a lot of problems with the default settings? The only way to answer, honestly, a lot of those questions is to try it, And so you definitely don't need a PhD. You can download a 30-day eval on these things.
Yep.
Read one of those good books that Joanne was referencing earlier, and dive in. Take a 20-page piece of something and just bring it in, and then you make, like I do all the time, 100 mistakes, and then you say, okay, it was only 20 pages. Next month I'm going to set aside an afternoon and try it again, right? And learn from that, and on you go. But I'm just really a huge advocate of trying it. Listen to everybody, but then also go and try it yourself, because you may find that it goes well and it may not, but you'll know.
Yeah, exactly. I want to mention that we have coming up actually next week a DITA boot camp, which is designed for newcomers, and it's a whole week of everything from business case through publishing. Kind of touches on all the bases, which is a good way to start. What comes with that? Several people asked about a beginner's book. There are a number of good DITA books out, but I will mention the one that we've developed here called Introduction to DITA, version 2, second edition, which we completed after DITA 1.2. We're now working on DITA 1.3 in the third edition. But I think it's a good book for beginners because it has tutorials. It's really a step-by-step instructional book rather than just a discussion. So you get sample files to use and things you can try out. I'm also going to be in talking about content management in Sydney, Australia in a few weeks. We have an advanced user reuse strategies coming up in the UK, and minimalism and agile development are other workshops that are coming up. And we have a couple of webinars that people might also be interested in that are coming up in the next month or so.
And I think, as Joanne mentioned in the past, the quality of the breadth of the tools are going up, but also just the way that the tools vendors can be of such help. I mean, like our host DCL, if you wanted to get a good feel for what your quality issues might be before you do a broad kind of DITA migration, wow, talk to people that are the pros, and they'll fill you right in. And I found them just fabulously helpful. In other words, don't get stuck. Go talk to people, talk to vendors. Read these books, do the seminars. Yeah.
When working with DCL, when I've seen people try to convert difficult content, and and DCL will do as good a job as possible, and then you look at the content and you say, we might have to come up with a new structure. because what we started with is really difficult. And I often advise people to say, really take a look carefully at your legacy content. There's a chapter in my book on my enterprise publishing book, Content Management for Dynamic Web Delivery. I have a whole chapter on evaluating legacy, your existing content, and deciding what path it should take. Sometimes that path is leave it alone and not do anything, especially if it's getting toward end of life or it's not being updated very much. So, really, take a look at the content that you should be moving ahead with. And don't feel that you have to do everything.
Right, absolutely. If it ain't broken, keep shipping it.
Yeah, so because we've been asking a lot about books. Tony Self has an Intro to DITA book. What are the other ones that you could name?
Oh, best practices is a good one from the folks at VMware and IBM.
Yes.
And I think the IBM manual on information design and management is a wonderful one as well.
Right. Oh, yes. And the IBM
and
quality book.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Lots of resources.
Rockley's book, Intro to DITA, an introduction, or I forget the exact name, but available. Where are the books that we should be? What are the books? Have we gone through that list? And most of these are available on Amazon.
Yep. Julio Vasquez is going on Practical DITA.
That was the one I was trying to remember. Right.
Yeah. And I'm sure that many of them will be updated to reflect the new features in DITA 1.3 and eventually to accommodate the lightweight DITA work that is in development right now. So lots of stuff happening content-wise.
Yeah. Well, I think we've addressed a lot of the questions that were coming in. And if people would like to contact us with other questions that they might have, specifically some of these about tools, we should. We're trying not to advocate specific tools on this, but there's good information on the infomanagementcenter.com about the easy authoring tools, and lots of articles, most of them free, about people who have implemented DITA and, of course, done other things since it's a management in general. But there's plenty of things. If you use the faceted search in the publication search, you can find the articles that deal with DITA. So I want to thank all of you for attending, and half of you for sticking it out so long. You'll be getting the recording.
Amen. And thanks very much. And always a good plug. If you're interested, please get involved with OASIS. It's make it part of yours. Make it part of yours. And there's new community things we'll be doing that would make the bar for getting involved much more realistic.
And then hopefully you are. We will see you at the CMS conference in in about a month. I know I'll see Stan, so
oh, yeah.
Hopefully more of you will be there.
Got my number.
Thank you all for attending.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.